5,300 years ago, in the warm, humid foothills of what is now southern Ecuador, right at the edge of the great Amazonian forests, someone sat by a fire and ground dark seeds with a stone. The seeds were first left to ferment, then dried in the sun, then crushed into a thick paste and mixed with water. Out came a drink, dark, bitter, dense, like nothing else. The person who drank it knew not a single word of our language and lived in a world without writing, without metal, without the wheel. But the taste on that tongue is painfully familiar to you and me. It was cacao. For a long time, scientists were certain that cacao's homeland was Central America, the lands of the Maya and the Aztecs. Then archaeologists moved farther south, into a mountain valley in southern Ecuador, and found an ancient settlement there. They named it Santa Ana La Florida, and they called the people who once lived there the Mayo Chinchipe culture. In the cracks of their old clay vessels, tiny traces had survived. When those traces were studied in a laboratory, they turned out to be about 5,300 years old, and they were cacao, 1,500 years older than the earliest cacao among the peoples of Central America. So it turns out that the first to acquire a taste for it were not the Maya and not the Aztecs, but people whose names we'll never know, who lived at the foot of the mountains thousands of years before them. And what began as a bitter drink by a distant campfire has today become a huge global industry worth more than $100 billion a year. And it's no accident. Wild cacao comes from exactly this place, from the upper Amazon. Here the cacao tree has the greatest variety of species and varieties, more than anywhere else on Earth. Scientists explain it simply. The more relatives a plant has in one place, the more likely it is that this is its true home. And from this home, cacao slowly, century after century, moved north. People took the seeds with them, planted them in new places, and that's how the tree reached the lands of Central America. There, centuries later, loud fame was waiting for it. The Maya and the Aztecs came to love cacao so much that they made it part of their faith. They were certain the tree had been given to them by the gods. The cacao drink was drunk at weddings, at festivals, during important rituals. It was served to rulers and offered to the gods. One discovery revealed just how highly the Maya valued cacao. In an ancient tomb at a place called Rio Azul, archaeologists found a vessel about 1,500 years old. On its lid was a special sign, the word cacao. And when scientists checked what had once been stored inside the vessel long ago, they found traces of cacao. The ancient person had practically left a label on the bottle so that centuries later we would know exactly what they had been drinking. By the way, the very word we use every day comes to us from the depths of those times. Cacao comes from the old language of a people who were probably even older than the Maya, and chocolate comes from the language of the Aztecs. We don't even stop to think that when we order a cup of cocoa at a cafe, we're repeating sounds that are thousands of years old. But the ancient drink wasn't anything like ours. It had no sugar and no milk. It was thick, dark, and very bitter. People added corn, hot chili pepper, and fragrant vanilla to it. The foam was prized most of all. To produce it, the drink was poured from one vessel into another from a height, again and again, until a dense cap built up on top. This foam was considered the tastiest and most important part. Cacao was also money, real money, used to buy and sell. Beans were stacked, counted, saved up. Old records have preserved the prices of that time. For one bean, you could get a ripe avocado or a large tomato. For 3 beans, a turkey egg. For 30, a rabbit. And a whole turkey cost about 100 beans. And where there's money, there are always swindlers. Clever crooks would scoop the pulp out of the beans and stuff the empty shells with clay or wax, so the bean would look whole and heavy. Counterfeiting money, as you can see, is a very ancient occupation. When power in these lands passed to the Aztecs, cacao became even more important. In their language, they called the drink cacahuatl. Cacao itself barely grew in Aztec territory. It was too dry. So beans were brought into their huge capital from every corner of the empire as tribute from conquered lands. These shipments were recorded in special books. From a hot southern region called Soconusco, caravans carried sacks of cacao to the feet of the ruler. The greatest cacao lover of all was the great Aztec ruler himself, Montezuma. A Spanish soldier who saw his court with his own eyes left a record of it. He told how Montezuma was served foamed chocolate in cups of pure gold. The ruler would drink cup after cup, and this was considered a sign of his strength and greatness. But not everyone could try such a drink. According to old chronicles, chocolate was almost forbidden to common people. Only the chosen drank it: nobles, priests, warriors, and wealthy merchants who led caravans along the distant roads. For everyone else, the bitter drink of the gods remained an unreachable luxury that could only be dreamed about. And so cacao lived for many centuries, sacred, expensive, hidden behind the high walls of palaces. A drink that was offered to the gods and paid for like gold. None of those people could have even imagined that one day this bitter brew would cross the ocean, change beyond recognition, and end up in the hands of every child on the planet. But that's exactly what was going to happen. Because ships from an entirely different world were already sailing toward the shores, where cacao was a sacred object and a currency. It all began not with a great conquest, but with a small mistake. In 1502, the ships of Christopher Columbus were sailing along the coast of what is now Honduras. This was his fourth voyage to the new lands. Near one of the islands, the Spaniards intercepted a large trading canoe belonging to the local people. The canoe was loaded to the brim with goods, and among them lay strange dark seeds. Columbus noticed that the owners of the canoe guarded these seeds like the apple of their eye. When a few beans accidentally fell to the bottom, the indigenous people rushed to pick them up as carefully as if precious stones had rolled across the ground. But Columbus himself didn't understand what it was about. He decided it was some kind of unusual almond and paid no attention to the find. So Europe first brushed against cacao and immediately walked past with complete indifference. Cacao really arrived in the Old World later, and by an entirely different route. According to the earliest records, chocolate was shown to the Spanish court in 1544. Monks brought noble guests from the lands of the Maya to the future king, and they whipped up a real cacao drink for him in the traditional vessels. And the first ship with a full cargo of cacao beans reached Spain only in 1585. After that, for nearly 100 years, Spain became the sole keeper of chocolate in Europe. The secret was guarded, the beans were protected, and other countries could only watch from afar and lick their lips. But there was one important turning point. Europeans didn't like that bitter Aztec drink at all. Too sharp, too spicy, too unfamiliar. And so they began to change it to suit themselves. This happened in the monasteries of New Spain, in the lands of present-day Mexico. Around 1590, the monks took the burning pepper out of the drink and replaced it with cane sugar. They kept the fragrant cinnamon and vanilla. They began serving cacao hot rather than cold. And to whip up the foam, they invented a special stirring stick. It was twirled between the palms right in the cup. And then the most important thing happened. The bitter drink of the gods turned sweet. From a stern ritual, it turned into a pleasure. From that moment, chocolate began an entirely new life. Sweet cacao quickly conquered the courts of Europe. It came to France together with a Spanish princess, who in 1615 married the French king. She brought chocolate along as a rare and expensive curiosity, and the French nobility immediately fell in love with the new taste. In England, special places sprang up, chocolate houses. People came there not just to drink a cup, but also to talk business, close a deal, discuss the news, and even politics. One of the most famous such houses in London was called the Cocoa Tree. It became the unofficial headquarters of an entire political party. Serious matters were settled there over a cup of chocolate. Chocolate was also long regarded as a medicine. The court physician to the King of Spain seriously cataloged the diseases cacao supposedly cured and the ailments it relieved. Chocolate was prescribed as a remedy, believed to restore strength and vigor. But for all this enthusiasm, one big problem remained. For more than 2 whole centuries, chocolate was only a drink, and a difficult drink at that. Making it was slow and laborious, and the result came out greasy, gritty, with an oily film on top. Only the wealthy could afford such a thing. For ordinary people, chocolate was still beyond reach. Everything was changed by a chain of inventions, and each one brought chocolate closer to us. The first breakthrough came in 1828. A Dutchman by the name of Van Houten figured out how to separate cacao into 2 parts. He learned to press the fatty oil out of the beans and turn what remained into a fine, dry powder. This was an enormous step. Chocolate could now be made quickly and in large quantities, which meant cheaply. For the first time, it became available not to a few, but to many. And there was more to come. In 1847, an English firm from the city of Bristol mixed cocoa powder, butter, and sugar, and for the first time cast this mass into a solid bar. Something happened that hadn't happened in 5,000 years. Chocolate had gone from a drink to something you could hold in your hand and bite into. And nearly 20 years later, the same firm released the world's first filled chocolate bar, which began to be sold everywhere. But the bar was still dark and rather bitter. It lacked the final, most tender touch, milk. And milk arrived. In the early 20th century, in 1905, an English company produced a milk chocolate bar that became the model for every milk chocolate in the world. The soft, light, melting flavor that every child knows today was born right then. All that remained was to make chocolate truly smooth. And that was the achievement of a master from the Swiss city of Bern. Back in 1879, he discovered a method of kneading the chocolate mass for a very long time, for hours, without stopping. After such kneading, chocolate lost all its grittiness and became velvety, silky, melting in the mouth. That very tenderness we love in a good bar, we owe it to this patient man. And on the other side of the ocean, a story of its own was unfolding. In America, there lived a man by the name of Hershey. At a great exhibition in Chicago in 1893, he saw German chocolate-making machines for the first time and was captivated. He sold his old caramel factory and decided to take chocolate to a grand scale. Hershey built his workers a whole town bearing his name, with houses, schools, and parks. And at the factory, he began producing sweets that millions of people still love to this day. Little chocolate drops and bars with peanut filling. So in just about 100 years, the bitter drink of the gods traveled an incredible road. From a heavy, greasy, expensive beverage for the chosen few, it became a smooth, sweet bar that anyone could buy. What was once sipped from golden cups now sat on shop counters in a wrapper, costing a couple of coins. But chocolate still had one more, quite unexpected role ahead. Very soon, this peaceful sweet would head to a place where you'd least expect to find a treat, to a real, full-scale war. And there it would sustain the strength and warm the hopes of many people. In April 1937, a military man came to the Hershey chocolate factory, Captain Paul Logan of the U.S. Army. He had a strange request. The Army needed a special chocolate for soldiers in the most extreme circumstances when there was no other food around. But the request sounded almost like a joke in reverse. This chocolate had to be unappetizing. More precisely, not so tasty that a soldier would want to eat it ahead of time, out of boredom or temptation. The requirements were strict. The bar had to weigh about 4 ounces, not melt in the heat, give a hungry man plenty of energy, and taste only slightly better than boiled potatoes. That's exactly how it was put to the factory's chemists. They pulled it off. The result was a dense, very dark, barely sweet block that was named Field Ration D and known to the troops as the Logan Bar. Soldiers tucked it in a pocket, and it waited for the hardest day. Over the course of the war, the Hershey factory produced about 40 million such bars, plus around 380 million special tropical bars that didn't melt even in the fierce heat of deserts and jungles. But this story has its bright side too. When the war in Europe ended, American soldiers passed through liberated towns and villages. Hungry children would run out to meet them, and the soldiers would pull chocolate from their pockets and hand it out to the little ones. For many kids who'd grown up amid ruins, this was the first sweet taste in years. The bitter drink of the gods once again became what it had been long ago, a gift, and chocolate had long been seen as more than just a treat. In England, there was a family by the name of Rowntree. These people believed sweet cocoa could become a kind alternative to the strong drinks that were ruining the poor. And they didn't just trade. They looked after their workers. In the early 20th century, the head of the family built them a whole model village with good houses, parks, and aid for those in need. For them, chocolate was also a matter of conscience. This is how cocoa wove itself into people's lives all over the world. And in every country, it plays its own role. In Japan on Valentine's Day, chocolate isn't given by men to women, but the other way around, by women to men. And exactly a month later, on the 14th of March, comes White Day, when men return the gesture. In Germany, chocolate is tied to the winter feast of St. Nicholas, and every child waits for the calendar where a little chocolate hides behind each door. Today, chocolate is a huge industry worth more than $100 billion a year. But here's something few people know. Almost all cocoa grows far from those who eat the chocolate. About 69% of the world's cocoa comes from West African countries, and one small country alone, Côte d'Ivoire, produces roughly a third of the entire global harvest. And behind this stand not vast plantations, but millions of ordinary farmers with tiny plots of land. And here begins the bitter part of the story. According to a major study carried out in 2020, about 1.5 million children were working in cocoa fields in 2 African countries. Around 790,000 in one country and about 770,000 in the other. Many of them did heavy and dangerous work, with large knives, heavy sacks, and pesticides. People are trying to fix this. In 2019, the 2 main cocoa countries together introduced a special price premium, $400 on top of every ton of cocoa, so that farmers would have more money. But the bitter truth remains. Those who grow cocoa with their own hands have often never tasted a finished bar in their entire lives. Chocolate is simply too expensive for them. In response, a beautiful movement was born. Small craftsmen began buying beans directly from the farmers and paying more than the exchange price. They treat cocoa with the same care that winemakers give their grapes. They talk about the variety, about the place where the tree grew, about the soil and the weather there, and they distinguish between special, aromatic cocoa and the ordinary, plain kind. It turned out chocolate doesn't have just one flavor at all. A bar from a Venezuelan village, from a valley on the island of Madagascar, or from an old Ecuadorian variety differ from one another no less than different wines do. One has notes of nuts, another of berries, a third of flowers, not one flavor, but hundreds. But a threat now hangs over this fragile wonder. Cacao is a very temperamental tree. It grows only in a narrow, warm band right along the equator, and it fears heat, drought, and disease alike. In 2023 and 2024, tree diseases combined with drought badly damaged harvests in West Africa, and cocoa prices in 2024 soared to the highest levels in history. People are searching for a way out. Scientists are breeding hardy varieties that resist disease. Cacao is being planted in new countries, and some companies have taken a truly unexpected route. They've learned to make chocolate that tastes like chocolate without any cocoa beans at all, using ordinary grains and seeds. One such product is already on store shelves. So why do we love chocolate so much that the whole world is willing to rally to save it? There's a scientific answer here too. Hidden inside cocoa are substances that gently lift our spirits and give us a soft boost of energy, more than 600 different aromatic compounds all at once. And there's one more warm little secret. Cocoa butter melts just below human body temperature. That's why a piece of chocolate really does melt right in your mouth the moment you hold it on your tongue. The biggest chocolate lovers on earth are the Swiss and the Germans, about 10 kilograms per person every year. Over 5,000 years, cocoa has been a sacred drink, real money, medicine, a military ration, and a heartfelt gift. Those people around the Amazonian campfire, the first to grind those bitter seeds, couldn't have imagined our world today. But the most important thing hasn't changed. It's still something a person once tasted and could never forget.